It's Thanksgiving Eve by the time you're watching this, and maybe you're preparing a big meal and going to have lots of people over tomorrow, or maybe you have something quieter in mind. But whatever the case, I'm glad that you tuned in for our Wednesday night live stream. So tonight, I don't want to just preach a sermon as much as I want to tell you a story. And tonight, I want to talk about Thanksgiving, and I want to talk to you about some of the things that I personally am thankful for. Now, it's good to be grateful. It's good to verbalize our gratefulness and give thanks to the Lord. It's good to sit around and talk about happy endings in stories that we've lived already in life. And you know, the Bible even commands us clearly to give thanks. But one question is, why? Why does God tell us to give thanks? Well, is it to make sure that God doesn't feel underappreciated? Because I know if I do something for my kids and they don't say thanks, sometimes I feel underappreciated. And you know, I don't know, I think God likes hearing people say thank you, hearing his kids say thank you. But at the same time, I think he's pretty secure in his ego and his sense of self-worth. So really, when we give thanks, or when God tells us to give thanks, it's not really necessarily for him. I mean, it's directed towards him. But personally, I think that God tells us to do it for our benefit. It's healthy for us to give thanks and recognize what the Lord has done for us. Now, when we have a thankful heart and when we say thank you, what does this do for us? How does this benefit us? Well, for one, the first big thing I want to say is it causes us to focus on the positive, okay? In Philippians 4:8, you're probably familiar with the scripture. It talks about whatever things are good or pure or true or noble. The list goes on. It says, think about these things. And you know, when I was younger, I may have kind of subconsciously just kind of brushed that off like, oh, that's a nice thought. You know, okay, sure, whatever. I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. I'm just saying I didn't realize that, well, now what I think is thinking on the positive may well be essential to our survival and our thriving as Christians. You know, there's so much negativity in the world that comes at us that we have to choose to think about what is good. You know, the goodness of God is always bigger than the badness in the world, but sometimes we have to take our eyes off of the bad and focus it intentionally on the good. Giving thanks helps us do that. You know, a second thing that Thanksgiving or thankfulness does for us is it helps us remember that we are not self-sufficient. Everything that we have, we did not just go out and get on our own. You know, you may even be a self-made man, but where would you be without somebody somewhere along the way that helped you out? Or how about this? The air that God gave you to breathe. You know, when I'm thankful, it helps me remember my proper place in the universe. I mean, on a galactic scale, I am small and weak. And yet the creator of the universe deigns to stoop down and pay me attention, to help me out, to listen to my prayer. You know, Paul in 1 Corinthians 4:7, he says something interesting. He asks a couple questions. He says, what do you have that you didn't receive? And if you did receive it, why do you boast as though you hadn't? Do you realize, what does that mean? To me, it means, look, everything I have pretty much, it didn't come out of nowhere and I didn't get it on my own. Somebody greater blessed me with it. Whether it was a person in a position to bless or whether it was more directly from God on high. And you know, when we're thankful, we remember that we've been blessed by someone greater than ourselves. Okay, so I said I wanted to tell a story more than preach. That was a little bit of preaching, but here I want to tell you a story. And this is the story of the worst Thanksgiving ever. The worst Thanksgiving ever. Now, this is a story that I lived. This is a true story. It was November of 2021. And my wife Tammy and I, had both gotten COVID-19. Do you remember those days? Now, you may recall that COVID was this strange disease that came in many flavors. Different people had different experiences with COVID. Some would get it really bad, some not so bad. Some people would have trouble breathing, some people not so much. A lot of people lost their sense of smell, but maybe not everybody. So, what did we have? Or what did I have? I can't speak for my wife right now, but body aches, fever, and the worst thing for me personally, the single worst symptom of COVID-19 was my stomach. Like, it was upset, I couldn't eat, just didn't feel good. And maybe it wasn't even COVID-19. I don't know. It might have been a side effect of some medication. But at any rate, COVID-19 for me was the most miserable I had ever felt in my life for that long, which for us ended up being about 2 weeks. I don't remember ever spending a worse 2 weeks in my life. The next time you see my kids, if you see them in the halls at Encourager, ask them with what stoicism and grace and dignity I bore my suffering. Actually, don't ask them, because they'll tell you that for 2 weeks I moaned like a dying animal. Just saying. Now, listen. There are a lot of diet plans you can read about or find on the internet or maybe on TV, whatever. But I'm going to tell you one diet plan that I do not recommend to anyone. And that's the COVID-19 diet plan. I went on the COVID-19 diet plan, whether I wanted to or not, and I lost 10, maybe as much as 15 pounds in those 2 weeks that I was sick. Our kind friends would have food delivered to our house, and our kids ate like kings. But for me, it was take a couple bites, and that's it. It was kind of people to think of us, but man, I just could not eat it because my stomach was so upset. So listen, one thing that saved my life, and the first thing that I want to tell you that I'm thankful for, even during the worst Thanksgiving ever, was Topo Chico. Guys, Topo Chico, I don't know that I had drunk very much of it before, but there was something, like regular tap water wouldn't do it, still water wouldn't do, but there was something about that carbonated, bubbly, tart taste of Topo Chico. It was like one of the only things that I could stand to drink. And it may have quite literally saved my life. So even in the midst of COVID-19 and the worst Thanksgiving ever, I had something to be thankful for. And that just happened to be Topo Chico. This is not a paid endorsement. I'm just saying that's from the bottom of my heart. What's another thing that I was thankful for during the worst Thanksgiving ever? Well, I can tell you, I'm thankful for my doctor. We had a doctor, probably actually it was his physician assistant, but in any case, the doctor and or his assistant just helped us. I think we did a telemedicine confrontation, then they prescribed this medicine. Maybe it wasn't the same medicine that every doctor was out there prescribing, but I'm thankful for medical professionals, that care for us and that help us to get better. I believe in supernatural healing, but I thank God for doctors too. And I know that many people got sicker than we did. I know that some people lost loved ones, even people in our own congregation, and we mourn those losses. But those of us who had COVID and went to the doctor and got treated and we made it through, we're still alive, I think we can say we're thankful for doctors, nurses, and medical professionals. So if that's you, if you're a medical professional, thank you for caring for us. Towards the end of my COVID experience, I must have been starting to get better. Then that's when it really got time to be Thanksgiving. So I guess I got COVID a couple weeks before Thanksgiving that year. And I know that Thanksgiving isn't as big as Christmas, okay? But it's still a major holiday. And Thanksgiving is, for us, it's usually a time where we either travel and see extended family or where we host and people come to our house. And you don't see these people all the time. It's not always easy to get vacation time and make those long trips, take those flights, whatever, and see your family. But 2021 turned out to be a year where we did not travel for Thanksgiving, and I don't guess anybody really cared to come to our house with all our germs and see us, but it was just kind of rough, because see, I love to travel and I love to go see people and do stuff. I love to get out. And that year I felt robbed. It's like, we had this major holiday, and every year of my life, it's like we always get to travel at Thanksgiving or see people, and I didn't get to that year. And one thing that I ended up having to deal with, on top of all the physical symptoms, is I had to deal with depression. And let me tell you, you say, well, it's all in your mind. Well, it felt very real. And personally, I kind of wonder if kind of an undiagnosed symptom of COVID was depression. But anyway, that's another story. It was rough. It was rough. But like I said, I was getting better. I was able to make some food for Thanksgiving, even if I didn't necessarily eat a lot. And then sometime after that, a friend of mine, Pastor Abe, who was youth pastor here before me, he invited me out one day to go to pastor's lunch. Now, what is pastor's lunch? Here at Encourager at the time, every Monday, some of the staff, particularly pastors, would go out and have lunch together. And I wasn't on staff at the time, but you know what? The pastors, the staff, they let me come with them and eat Chinese food. And I believe that the reason that Pastor Abe did that he invited me, was he had had COVID, and he understood how important it was for a person, after recovering, to get out and be with people. It's not to see the world, but, to socialize and not just be at your house or be alone all the time. And what this did, it didn't address the effects of COVID on my body, but it helped address the effects of COVID on my soul. And you know what? That is something that I'm thankful for, even after the worst Thanksgiving ever. I also remember after being sick and getting better that, I missed a couple weeks of church, and I can't tell you when I've missed 2 weeks of church. Anyway, I just was raised going to church and been kind of doing this thing my whole life. And I remember going back to church after being out for a couple weeks. And I think it was a Wednesday night. I believe it was Wednesday night was the first time I went back. And, I may have no longer been contagious, but you don't feel 100% right away. I'm sure you know how that goes. And that wasn't the bad part. The bad part was this. I hate to say it in a way, but still, it's the truth. It's not that the message was bad. It's not that the service was bad. But there was something that night, that Wednesday night, that by the time I left, something didn't sit well with me. Something, someone said didn't resonate, didn't sit well in my soul. And I left church in a pretty bad frame of mind. And that's not right. I mean, that's not typical. So you're supposed to go to church and be uplifted. And here I had gone to church and I didn't like what I heard, whatever. And then I was just kind of in a depressed funk, if you will. And then I was driving home and I had Christmas music on, because that's what we do after Thanksgiving or even before Thanksgiving. And I had Chris Tomlin's Christmas album on, the one called Adore. And there's a track on that album. It's called, what's it called? Hymn of Joy. Hymn of Joy. And actually, it's also known as Joyful, Joyful, We Adore Thee. And it's set to, I think, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Everybody knows this song. And as I listened to that song kind of began to minister to me. And it's like God spoke to me, or rather, God comforted me with this song about joy in the midst of my funk and my depression. So even though it had been a rough 2 weeks and a rough Thanksgiving, and I felt bad that night after church, here's like the comfort of the Lord coming in the form of this song that Chris Tomlin and his friends recorded, and it ministered to me. And I still love that song. I still love that particular recording of that song. And you know what? Even in the midst of post-COVID depression, I had yet another thing to be thankful for. as believers, as Christians, we believe that God is able to heal anyone of any sickness. And yet we don't understand why it seems like healing doesn't always come. Some people, pray for, and we haven't seen everybody get healed that we've ever prayed for. And also, according to Psalm 91, we believe that God is able to protect and preserve us, and he's able to keep us from getting sick in the first place. And again, I don't understand all the time why, well, God, why didn't you keep this from happening? Why didn't you keep me and Tammy from getting sick or other people from getting sick? And I don't know, but I want to say this. In March, I believe it was March of 2019, so this is well before the COVID epidemic began, okay? Months before, I had the opportunity of preaching one Sunday morning at Encourager Church. And the word that I had to give that morning was about the secret place. And it was about God covering us with his wings and God protecting us and like the benefits of being in that secret place. Because in Psalm 21, what does it say? He that dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. Now look, I didn't know what was to come. I didn't know that the world was going to go through an unprecedented global health crisis a year or less later. But whether or not my sermon blessed anybody in the audience that day, whether anybody got anything out of it or not, when COVID came, that word about the Lord protecting us and covering us with his wings, that was a word that I was able to hold on to for comfort. And do you remember, if you were there, you remember all the fear. There was so much fear during the COVID season, especially towards the beginning. And it was comforting, it was reassuring, it was helpful to have a word that God, is bigger than this. God is able to protect us. He's mightier than this. And that's another thing that even at the worst Thanksgiving ever, that I was thankful for. I was thankful to have that. I will also mention that this is off script, but the Lord gave the world that Carrie Job song, The Blessing. It's like he released that anthem right at the time that the world would need to know he was still good. He was still on the throne. He was still a God who blesses. Something to be thankful for. Of course, needless to say, Tammy and I did eventually get COVID, okay? But it wasn't, right at the start of 2020 or whatever. It was, almost 2 years later, whatever. But here's what's funny. Now, I can't speak for you. I can't tell your story, but I can tell you what I think in my experience. By the time we finally got COVID in November of 2021, the fear was gone. At first, everybody was freaking out, man, worldwide panic. But after a year or two, people's attitude began to change. I think also doctors got better at treating it. We had a better understanding of what it was and what it wasn't. And when I got sick, the thing was, I wasn't terrified that I was going to die. And as strange as that sounds, see, we were sick. We may have been sick with physical symptoms, but one thing we weren't sick with was fear. We weren't sick with fear. And I'm thankful for that. It may sound weird, but I'm thankful because you know what? Fear is a lousy symptom to have on top of fever and body aches or maybe even difficulty breathing. Fear, Lord, help us to say no to fear because he's the one. He takes care of us. He protects us. Now when I look back at that period in our lives or that period of history, man, one thing I can say I'm thankful for is that all that nonsense is in the rear view mirror. I'm glad that the world, I know there's some cases here and there, but it's not like it was in 2020. The whole COVID epidemic thing, I'm so glad the masks and the social distancing and all that stuff, I'm glad it's over. I think we learned something from the experience. I think that God forbid, if we ever had to go through something like that again, we would do it differently. But you know what? I think one thing we did learn was what's truly essential for life. What's essential? Your family, your friends, your church family, and you know what? The strength that we have when we come together and love on and support each other. You know, the grace of God empowers. There's a grace, of saving and forgiving, but there's also a grace that empowers. And when we meet with, or when we receive God's empowering grace, I believe it does two things. The first thing the grace of God does for us is He makes the impossible possible. So things that we couldn't do at all on our own, we are supernaturally able to do with the grace of God. But there's also another kind of empowering grace, or maybe it's just a different degree, but still, the grace of God also makes what is hard, what is difficult, it makes it easier. And I don't know, like I said, we don't always know why trials happen, why bad things happen, why we get sick, whatever. But where would we be without the grace of the Lord in the midst of the trial? Where would we be without the love and the support and the friends who bring Topo Chico or send food to have it delivered over to our house? Where would we be without the prayers? Where would we be without the doctors even? Where would we be without the grace of God that even when it doesn't make the trial go away, it makes it bearable? So another thing that I'm thankful for, even at the worst Thanksgiving ever, is grace, the grace of God. As I wrap up this talk about gratefulness and giving thanks, I want to say this. If it wasn't clear already, a key part of thankfulness and of thanksgiving is looking for the good. Looking for the good. Now you can call this every cloud has a silver lining. You can call it always looking on the bright side or whatever. But whatever the case, the key is focus. The key is focus. Like I said earlier, the goodness of God is always bigger than the badness in the world. But sometimes we have to choose to turn our eyes off of that bad thing and put it on something that's really good, and that's the Lord and His grace and His kindness and His blessings. Thanksgiving as a national holiday in America is great. It's awesome because as a nation, we take time and we intentionally turn our gaze from the bad and we focus on the good and we give thanks. We recognize that what we have, we didn't get just on our own, but it was given to us by someone who's greater than ourselves. And you know what? All that means that we can be thankful, even if it's the worst Thanksgiving ever. From all of us here at Encourager Church, I want to say thank you for watching. We say God bless and have a great Thanksgiving.